Okay. Hello, Holly. How are you?
I'm doing great.
Thank you for coming on this show. It's nice to have you with us. I read through your bio and I found that statistic very alarming. Every 8 minutes, someone in the US dies of an opioid overdose.
It's a scary day and age. We thought we were getting over the crisis when we started implementing all of these national and state and federal regulations, changes in prescribing patterns, and putting a whole lot of money into the problem back between that 2016 to 2018 timeframe. You would think that things would be looking better despite these aggressive interventions, and the reality couldn't be the more opposite. In 2020, we saw at least a 30% increase in opioid-related overdoses across the United States. In 2021, it went up another 15%. So we are by no means out of crisis zone. If anything, it's worse.
Is most of this fentanyl?
It is synthetic fentanyl and other analogs or similar looking drugs that come across our borders. That's really the number one cause of death. But of course, if we look at the whole picture, physician prescribing that comes, in scrupulous ways to patients and unfortunately leads to long-term addiction can certainly propagate that problem as well.
Okay, can you just give a quick definition of what fentanyl is? Because up until 5, 6 years ago, I'd never even heard of it.
You probably didn't hear of it because it's a medication used most commonly within a healthcare setting for actual administration to a patient, as opposed to a prescription a patient would go home with. In general, the whole opioid drug class is probably one of medicine's greatest marvels, and we didn't hear about it because it wasn't causing too many issues inside the healthcare setting. In that healthcare setting, we're giving it to the right patient for the right indication, for the right length of period, and for the right dose. But outside of those parameters, when it's available now widely on the streets, none of those safety nets are in place. And of course, you don't know what you're getting in the average pill. There was a study done just a couple years ago that showed that 42% of all fentanyl that's tested out on the streets for one dose is enough to kill a person. So I'm not surprised by the statistics we see.
Okay, so it's just very highly concentrated opium.
It's a very strong opioid.
Okay.
Unlike many of the other opioids that we deal with, this was dealt with in micrograms as opposed to milligrams, which is a decimal percent there change. So very small amounts can lead to very potent analgesic activity as well as the risk of overdose.
Okay, and because most of this is coming into the country illegally, it's being made in someone's kitchen or God knows where. No regulation, no, yeah, you don't know what you're getting, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why do you think this particular one? I mean, we've had various drug crises over the years. Cocaine was a big one when I was growing up. And then there was methamphetamine, then there was crack. I remember in the 80s was a big problem. Why this one now? Is it just easier and cheaper to make?
That's one of the biggest issues. You're absolutely right. We know that overprescribing was a significant contributor to people becoming chronically hooked on these medications. And as we started tapering the number of prescriptions offered people in 2012, we saw the heroin epidemic go through the roof. Heroin is often brought over from Afghanistan. It takes a fair amount of work to get it out of the plant, and it's not that easy to get through the United States. But fentanyl is simple to make. It's in very small quantities to get the potency needed to have that high and the other effects people seek. And so it's just a much more easy drug from a transportation and a facilitation across the United States standpoint to get into the general public.
Okay, so what specifically are you doing? You work at the Mayo Clinic?
I do. I work at Mayo Clinic. I work in hospital internal medicine, and I also have addiction expertise. My big goal here is to help with the opioid stewardship program to relay the messages of how we use opioids safely and when they're appropriate to patients, as well as ensure that our institutional protocols meet the needs of patients so that we don't lead to the consequences that we're seeing in the US.
Are opioids one of the more addictive? I mean, it seems to me that they're all addictive, no matter which one. If it's Percocet or the stronger ones, I can't remember all of them. Dilaudid was another one. Back in the old West days, they used to drink laudanum. which was like this black goo that was probably horrible. But I think they were getting high on that. But it was all opium derivative, right?
You're absolutely right. Yeah, they did a study a few years ago and they looked at the risk of addiction of all sorts of drugs of abuse. And they put it on a scale of 1 to 5. And the most addictive substances, cocaine and methamphetamine, were 5 out of 5s. But opioids as a class sat right beneath that at a 4 out of 5. And that's the same number that tobacco got. And we all know how easy it is to get hooked on tobacco and how hard it is to kick it. So yes, these can be very addictive drugs. The data shows somewhere between 9 to 20% of people who are offered an opioid ultimately develop dependency, and that was by the American Medical Association a few years ago. So it's all the more reason that we need to get this right early on, because the risk of developing addiction can be fairly high and it can happen to anyone.
So are you working with people who have addiction problems, or what specifically are you doing?
So I'm a hospital internal medicine physician as well as an addiction specialist, and most of my expertise is helping people within the healthcare setting avoid the complications of chronic opioid use. Of course, we've got people who are already struggling with that, and I help assist with the development of the protocols, the workflows, and the processes to get those people the help they need. I grew up in the addiction treatment field. My parents had started a treatment program, and I was immersed in that environment till I got into the healthcare industry outside of the mental health industry. And it was really an eye-opener about how much these two systems, as often as they operate independently, truly have in common.
Is there any non-opioid or non-addictive painkillers out there that actually work?
Absolutely. In fact, you'd be surprised, but many of the drugs that we have available work better than the opioid drug class. And it's important to understand why we would use any of these at all. The point of pain is to actually be protective. It helps us know our limitations and based on that, allow us to heal over time. But the data shows 80% of all the world's opioids are used right here in the United States. And we're 5% of the world's population? A lot of that has to do with the mentality, right? We pop a pill for every little ache and pain, and that's not the point of experiencing pain. Acute pain has many treatment approaches, and what we want to do is pair non-pharmacologic treatments, so things like daily walking or engaging in activities. Tai Chi, yoga has benefits, physical therapy, along with the non-opioid drug classes like scheduled Tylenol or as-needed ibuprofen. What we want to do with opioids in those situations is use them as kind of the last resort effort to achieve functionality, not complete eradication of pain. With that stepwise approach, I think people will experience a whole lot less for toxicities.
Okay, well, that sounds good. Let's get to your book, because we're kind of running down on time. So your book is called Ending the Crisis. And give us a little overview of the book. Is the book for the general public, or is it specific to the medical profession? Who is your target audience?
This is the first and only book on the market right now for the general public talking about opioids. And we wrote the book for one specific purpose: to take the responsibility and put it in the hands of the everyday person, loved ones, family members of people using opioids, along with the people using them themselves, so they are equipped with the knowledge necessary to make good decisions. I would imagine most of our listening audience hasn't put their hand on a hot stove today, and there's a good reason for that, right? We learned very early on that touching a hot stove will lead to complications, consequences. That's what we want people to know about opioids. Just fill the United States with the endemic knowledge needed so that if they ever encounter an opioid along the course of their healthcare directives and treatment plans, they know how to use them safely, what questions to ask their provider, and then ultimately what to do if they develop complications like opioid use disorder or addiction. The latter half of this book is written primarily for that population, those struggling with addiction, and then the loved ones supporting them through it. So we help them find a treatment program, how to navigate the insurance industry, what questions to ask their providers, and even about the biology of what drives addiction so that people really understand the true disorder and why their loved ones behave the way they do.
What is the tone of the book? Is it very technical, medical, or I see on your bio here it says that it has detailed personal experiences, so you have stories from other people who have had addiction problems?
Yes, absolutely. We took the expertise from across our enterprise, from all of our subspecialists, and compiled it into this book, and then paired up with two world-leading patient education experts to really get the language down so that everyday people can understand this. I think it's a great compendium resource that people will find not only informational, but hopeful. We have filled it with real personal stories from individuals who've lived this epidemic, either as a family member or as a person that's going through it. And this is really the span of the epidemic, right? Those people struggling with chronic pain who weren't able to achieve the pain relief they needed and chose alternative mechanisms to deal with it, all the way to those struggling with opioid use disorder and all of its complications. We hope these stories of hope really empower people to understand that, yes, it's personal, and yes, there's hope.
People have talked about the border crisis. I don't want to get too political, but people have talked about the border crisis and that the fentanyl is just flowing across the border because of the cartels in Mexico. If hypothetically we were just to shut that off and stop the flow coming in, is that going to stop the addiction problems in this country, or are people just going to find other ways or other drugs to satisfy that?
You know what? I think our history speaks volumes to that. This opioid crisis started with prescribing. This was us handing out the medications. And as we see waves of epidemics come through this country, whether it be heroin or the prescribed opioid class or the fentanyl or the benzodiazepines like Valium and Xanax, the reality is clear. We've got major mental health problems in our country, and our ability to adapt to our environment in a healthy way is diminishing, in my perspective, on a regular basis. It is so key that people become empowered to use these drugs safely, to understand their consequences, and then to be proactive about management. I don't think we're there yet, and closing the border isn't necessarily the only way we're going to get out of this mess.
So do you think the medical community is as much to blame with what you were saying, like the pill pop mentality, just take a pill?
Oh, there is absolutely no doubt that we played a significant role in getting us into this crisis. When we look back, the opportunities for us to have been better educated or to have reviewed the literature closely as to whether or not our prescribed opioids put us at risk and our patients at risk for complications could have been done much better. And keep in mind, it's multifactorial. None of us are as guilty as all of us. We had the government tying reimbursement to patient satisfaction related to pain management. And so on a regular basis, we're asking patients, what's your pain score on a scale of 1 to 10, even if they didn't elicit pain? And of course, if they give us a number, we're going to act on it so that we get reimbursed to make sure we can keep the lights on. It was a very pathologic cycle. And then on top of that, we have the whole pharmaceutical industry promoting pain as the fifth vital sign and assuring us, I should say, that addiction is not a problem with pharmaceutical grade opioids, wherein the literature was showing us the exact opposite. That's our side of the world, but we can look right back to us as patients too, right? Were we asking questions, or are we walking away with a prescription and not thinking twice about whether or not there's complications with it? Were we raising those complications to our provider? Were families and friends being proactive and making sure they're being stored safely so that grandkids can't get into them? And were we being open in family meetings about our concerns with someone's patterns of opioid use? It is an all of us thing, and it's going to take all of us to get out.
I think on that, we're going to have to wind this down. We are out of time. Thank you so much for coming on.
I so appreciate it.
And sharing. The book is called Ending the Crisis. The author is Dr. Holly Geyer. Do you have a website that you want to give out?
I would refer people to mayoclinic.org for more information on opioids and resources out there. We also have a Mayo Clinic Opioid Resource Center. If you just type in those words on Google, it'll pull right up. And it's got much of the information in the book in a more succinct format to kind of give you hints of what information it contains. The book is now widely available from most booksellers, so feel free to use your favorite one and find it there.
Okay, great. Well, Holly, thank you again for coming on this show, and best of luck with the book and your work.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.